Harry Glide. Good to see you. No, never, well, only in a small time. This is my first time to meet here.
Harry, how are things in Windsor?
They're good. Well, we don't really see each other except we take our trash cans out and bring them back in.
Okay, we will go ahead and call our MAPS 4 meeting to order this morning. Thank you all so much for being here. And board members, it's so great to have everybody here. This is the first time that we've been able to all be together in quite some time, so it's fantastic to get to see you all. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes of the January 7th, 2021 MAPS 4 Citizens Advisory Board meeting. Do we have any corrections, amendments?
Yes, Madam Chairperson, there was one small correction, I'm looking for it, on page 3 of our minutes. The second paragraph, I believe. No, third paragraph, I'm sorry. It has been corrected on the minutes that we have here,
Yes,
but
we corrected that.
Okay,
We made that correction.
Yes.
After
Great.
the communication.
okay,
Yeah, Ms. Rose Crook said that I needed to
right, I asked him to.
point out that from what was sent to us to what we have in our packet today.
Right, great, thank you, Harry. Any other changes, corrections? Okay, I take a motion to approve the minutes. Okay, please vote. Okay. Councilman Stone Cipher votes yay. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Okay. On to our next item, item 3, the revenue and expenditure report.
Thank you,
David?
Madam Chair. You have in your packet the revenue and expenditures report for the period ending December 31st, 2020. Real quickly, on the revenue side for the month, $9,150,093. Previous collections of $57,240,996 for a total of $66,391,089. Then you also have the expenditures report, and you see that that really hasn't changed from last month, and there's not a whole lot on there, but as we progress, there will be.
Right, yes. Any questions of Mr. Todd? Yes, Shay.
I'm heartened to see that I've been watching each month that we've gone, a little bit, we've gotten a little bit closer to our goal. And I recall you saying that there was still time to catch up, even though, we are a little bit behind. When do we need to worry?
I don't think it's now. You know, in MAPS 3, we were averaging about $10 million a month. And there were a few months when we were down to 9, but there were several months when we were at 14. I think as we start to really get into approving the implementation plan and start with the projects, I think that's, I'm not going to say worry, but I think that's when we should start considering that.
Okay.
But right now, I think we should monitor this and see how it shakes out. Hopefully, when we're not wearing masks as much, you know, things will pick up.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All righty, got a motion, second? Okay, great. Please cast your votes. Councilman Stowe-Cipher is aye. Okay. Yeah. Ally, do you want a verbal vote?
I'm going to actually just get signed in and abstain on this vote.
Okay. All right. The report passes. Thank you so much. Okay. Moving on to presentations. So our first presentation today will be on the Oklahoma City Innovation District. And just as a reminder, we are seeing the presentations that were made to City Council by those interested in the particular projects so that we can get caught up to speed on these projects that have been voted and included in MAPS 4. So, David?
Yes, ma'am. So Kathy O'Connor here from the Alliance for Economic Development is here to present this presentation on the Innovation District. I'd like to invite her up.
Good morning. It's good to see
morning.
all of you today. We're going to try to run through a little bit more quickly than it went with the City Council to get through the presentation that we provided to them about the Innovation District. The MAPS program has become a nationally recognized model for economic development and quality of life. Since the passage of the first MAPS program in 1993, Oklahoma City has seen over $5 billion in private investment throughout the city. The MAPS program has worked, and it's the envy of communities across the country. Every year, we host cities that want to come here and learn about how the MAPS program has worked and why it's been so successful. So one of the projects included in MAPS 4 is for the Innovation District. And we need this project just like we need all of the other ones that the voters approved. A successful innovation district isn't a traditional research park or science corridor. It's a place that embraces the urban attributes of density, proximity, and accessibility. It's a place where a mashup of economic strengths, physical assets, and amenities and robust social networks foster an open, collaborative innovation ecosystem. Oklahoma City's economy was originally built on two main industries, agriculture and energy. As time moved on, hospitality, aerospace, and healthcare and biosciences became strong additions to our growth. But even as we continue to have strong economic growth in many of these sectors, we know that there are forces of change that are going to impact our city in the future. We've probably seen a lot of those just in this past year. But the impacts of globalization, autonomous vehicles, mobile internet, cloud technology, genomics, energy storage, advanced materials, robotics, 3D printing, and the Internet of Things will dramatically alter and disrupt our existing industries and the community we know today. This continued transformation of the Innovation District, go to the next one. Next one, sorry. I guess I need to tell you when to change, sorry. The continued transformation of the Innovation District will support the growth of jobs, not just in this district, but across the city. Creating a strong innovation infrastructure and entrepreneurial ecosystem will help Oklahoma City further diversify its economy, protect its residents from economic stress, and secure additional tax base that is critical to providing services to our citizens. Go to the next slide. Over the last 50 years, with the help of the University of Oklahoma and the state of Oklahoma, we have built a tremendous academic health center in our city. In the last 20 years, we've taken crucial steps in taking this center of employment and patient care and creating an economic engine out of it. Go to the next slide. The Innovation District MAPS 4 projects are an ideal application of the MAPS model. They are transformative public investments that will spur private investment, create jobs, and improve lives. Our existing businesses and expertise uniquely position our city to play a role in this innovation wave, but only if we find ways to bring these various entities together to take advantage of the collaboration. Go to the next one. In 2001, a report by Hammer, Seiler, George found that there were over 12,000 full-time workers in the health center. In 2019, there were 18,000. This 50% increase in just 18 years is an indicator of potential growth and a real motivator for continued strategic investment. During the same time period, there's been more than $1 billion of investment in new research and patient care facilities. Despite all of the success in the region, we know that we are only scratching the surface of our potential. We also know that this area has become, in many ways, a self-contained, mostly daytime campus where people drove in, worked, went to the doctor, visited a patient, and then went home. It isn't integrated into the neighborhoods that surround it, and in fact, many decisions in the past have had the opposite impact, creating barriers between the health center and the neighborhood. We can do better, and we can change this. We became, go to the next slide, and one more. Sorry, I got to remember to tell you to change. We became very interested in the work of the Brookings Institute, was doing around innovation districts, and they teamed with the Project for Public Spaces and came to Oklahoma City. They looked at Oklahoma City and Fort Worth, Oklahoma City and Philadelphia, excuse me. It was funded by the Bass family from Fort Worth to do a study to look at the powerful combination that a city can create when it works together to create this collision of economic sectors. The study conducted made recommendations that would activate an innovation district with broad impacts. The new path is about creating a community, a place where there are no barriers between the institutional aspects and the neighbors who live nearby, a place where there is a seamless flow of entrepreneurs, small businesses, and workers that combine to bring new vitality and economic growth. The first step was to create an organization that could lead this effort, and we took an existing entity, the Oklahoma Health Center Foundation, and transitioned its purpose and mission to become the Oklahoma City Innovation District. Go to the next slide. The second step recommended by Brookings was to develop a strategic plan for development and land use in the district. In 2019, through a partnership with the Oklahoma City Innovation District, the Alliance for Economic Development, the city, the state of Oklahoma, and the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber, we developed that strategy. A plan was developed with Perkins & Will, a firm with a proven record of accomplishment with transformational projects, including master plans for research parks and innovation districts throughout the country. The team worked closely with partners in the community. In fact, the community input on this extensive project with nearly 500 individuals providing input through a series of town hall meetings. Go to the next slide. There were several objectives we wanted to accomplish with this plan. We wanted to design a place of convergence that fosters synergistic connections and builds on existing strengths. We wanted to promote growth and attraction of new businesses around technology and health. We wanted to build an inclusive community that maximizes the positive impact of the surrounding neighborhoods, the city, and the region. And we wanted to ensure the plan is sensitive and respectful of the context of the surrounding area. And finally, we wanted a plan with an achievable strategy for implementation. The next part of the presentation will be provided by Katie Boren. Katie is the president of the Innovation District organization, and she'll be providing you with the details about the individual projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. You may be asking yourself, what is the difference in an innovation district and what we already have? I think the word district really limits the imagination and understanding of what we are creating. It is about building an ecosystem that facilitates the creation and commercialization of new ideas, adds jobs, and supports our economy. It is a place where small businesses and entrepreneurs thrive. We know that if we place creative institutions firms, and workers in proximity, then we will create collisions that result in new ideas and knowledge that can be transferred more quickly and seamlessly. In addition to this open innovation economy that rewards collaboration, we know that we also need programming and infrastructure that takes these new ideas, nurtures them, incubating their companies and accelerating their growth. Next slide. We have the building blocks of an ideal innovation district. We have leading-edge anchor institutions and companies. Connecting the people, adding the incubators and accelerator programs, and reconnecting this physical space with the neighborhoods that surround it, creating an innovation district that works for everyone. Success in our work will see our impact go far beyond the boundaries of the district, spurring innovation and entrepreneurship in multiple industries and creating jobs for people across our city. Next slide, please. The plan creates a core of innovation and then connects the anchors within the district and creates a fabric that weaves them all together. The planning team looked at the proximity of the key assets, the shortest routes between those assets, and the distance between the assets and co-working space. The recommendation was to create a hub of innovation near the existing Styles Circle, and then connect all of the Innovation District assets through a series of trails, sidewalks, and other strategies. This is where MAPS 4 comes in. There are 4 elements to our MAPS 4 projects: the development of Innovation Hall, the creation of the Henrietta B. Foster Center for Minority Small Business Development and Entrepreneurship, the renovation of Booker T. Washington Park, and increased connectivity throughout the district. The first project is the development of Innovation Hall. Innovation Hall is a single, standalone building located at the epicenter, with spaces and programming centered around innovation and collaboration. This building will be the communal meeting place for the district, the public house of innovation, the nerve center where workers from key industries will meet and interact, create connections, exchange knowledge, and bring innovation to life. Next slide, please. It will be the place from which substantive programming will emerge, including STEAM learning academies, workforce development and training, and conferences focused on collaboration, innovation, and entrepreneurship. It will be a place where community members gather, supporting collaboration across the vibrant neighborhoods that surround the area and extend throughout Northeast Oklahoma City. Next slide, please. And next slide. Sorry, it must be a really exciting group of slides. Sorry about that. Henrietta B. Foster Center. The second project is the redevelopment of the Henrietta B. Foster Center into a minority small business development and entrepreneurship center. We know that innovation and entrepreneurship can change lives and communities. This new center will focus on the creation and growth of small business with a particular focus on minority-owned businesses. The building at 614 Northeast 4th Street, which has a historic significance to the surrounding community, will continue to be a place of importance with a new mission to bring prosperity and redevelopment. Next slide, please. And next slide. Thank you. The center will work alongside growing businesses to revitalize important commercial districts in the area, bringing services and activities to residents. Next slide, please. This building has served as a symbol of community connection and growth. The vision for this building is that it can continue those significant roles. Last renovated in the 1980s to serve as a recreation center, it will serve as a center of entrepreneurship and small business for the community. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. The third project is the complete renovation of Booker T. Washington Park. The park is also located along 4th Street, directly south of the redeveloped Page Woodson School and east of the Foster Center. It is a popular gathering and event space and was frequently mentioned as an important asset by community members during community engagement exercises for the Innovation District Land Use and Strategic Development Plan. Next slide, please. The design of the park has already been completed by the Parks Department, and the project for the park has been placed within the MAPS 4 Parks project. It includes practice fields, basketball courts, walking trails, shade structures, picnic areas, and a food truck court. This renovated park would serve as an outdoor extension of the activities taking place at Innovation Hall and the Foster Center, while at the same time bringing vitality to the communities it serves. That brings me to the fourth project, the necessary connectivity components between the assets. In its study, Perkins and Will looked very closely at how to connect people, the scientists and researchers, the neighbors, the workers, the entrepreneurs, to the assets in the district. They recommend a series of connections that recreate connective tissue between the various pieces, making it easier for someone who lives in the surrounding neighborhoods to access the Innovation District and downtown, making it easier for someone who lives downtown to access the Innovation District. At the core of this connection is Innovation Plaza, a hub of activity that will include Innovation Hall and will attract private investment. An expanded bridge. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. An expanded bridge over I-235 and 10th Street, next slide, please, would increase connections and activity, help pedestrians and bike riders feel safe as they move between Automobile Alley, the Innovation District, Midtown, downtown, and the adjacent neighborhoods. Next slide, please. A series of well-designed and lighted sidewalks and trails would add to the better pedestrian and bicycle connectivity between all the assets in the district, as well as Innovation Hall, the Foster Center, and Washington Park. Next slide, please. These MAPS 4 projects set the stage for private investment in the Innovation District and will bring that economic development that MAPS 4 is renowned for. Thank you.
Outstanding. So any questions of, oh, Kathy, so sorry.
We
Please
just have a
continue.
couple more slides.
No,
Just
please.
and actually, we can probably skip the end of the presentation if
No,
you
go
want us to.
ahead.
It just talks about job creation. And,
No, go ahead.
So let's go to the next slide. Okay. When we set out to create a strategy for the district, we knew that we had a tremendous opportunity to focus on one of the city's key economic engines and take it to the next level. We also knew that we could create a strategy that provides for inclusive growth, connecting residents in the surrounding area with jobs and training, connecting area businesses and institutions, and preserving and improving the accessibility of affordable housing. Go to the next slide. In fact, many of the jobs created in the district will not require a 4-year degree, yet they offer competitive wages, likely to exceed the average wage of Oklahoma County. These projects allow us to create a sense of place for the neighborhoods in the Innovation District, which is particularly important because past development of this area did not. The investments in infrastructure and the pursuant redevelopment will spur the growth of small businesses in the area in addition to bringing in outside private investment. We will not just create economic development, but they will create a community, not a campus, but a development that is part of the fabric of this place. With the new vision for the Henrietta B. Foster Center, we will preserve this building of historic significance. As the activities conducted there move to the new Douglas Recreation Center, we will have the opportunity to repurpose this structure for an important and vital use. All of these facilities and their associated program bring the community into this economic asset in a meaningful way with lasting results. From workforce training and development to professional development for workers, STEM education programs for students, collaboration between entrepreneurs and researchers, this place will be the center of a cultural shift to innovation that creates lasting impact on the lives and our economy. Go to the next slide. I think it's important to review the economic impact that will be generated by the additions to the district. This study was done as a part of the Perkins and Will Strategic Land Use and Development Plan, so that was a component of the planning process that we went through with Perkins and Will. The first phase alone will create an additional annual impact of $1.2 billion a year. Go to the next slide. With more than 3,000 permanent jobs and another 3,500 induced or secondary jobs, the tax impacts could exceed 21 million each year, and together, the projects bring another 29 to 47 million dollars in tax increment financing revenues that can be used to encourage additional investments and growth in the area. Go to the next slide. The projects we're talking about today are absolutely necessary to attract private investment that is included in this first phase and facilitating the remaining phases of development that will only grow the area's potential. These are very real impacts that will make a difference to our citizens and to our city. Go to the next slide. So this is a summary of the projects that were included in the MAPS 4 proposal. $10 million for Innovation Hall to be matched with $10 million from other sources, $15 million for the renovation of the Henrietta B. Foster Center, $5 million for Booker T. Washington Park, $25 million for the connectivity and accessibility infrastructure improvements, and then $21 million in the investment fund. At the heart of the Innovation District, go to the next slide, is an academic health center that plays a vital role in the quality of life for our citizens. 2 million patients a year walk through the doors of these institutions looking for healing, an answer, or a cure. When we create this kind of dynamic, cutting-edge environment that attracts the world's best physicians and researchers, we have a chance to provide them and us with that top level of treatment because we have created this asset, this environment, and this place. This type of project sets our city apart. Brookings, in their report, found that Oklahoma City's Innovation District has the assets that could propel our region into global prominence. They also said that in order to do this, we must create a plan that supports a new vision and a new set of strategic priorities that creates a dynamic, inclusive hub and entrepreneurial activity, and that is our plan. And I will be glad to answer any questions.
Kathy and Katie, thank you so much for your presentations. This is really a very exciting project and transformative. So questions or comments, board? Bob?
Yeah, Kathy, once Innovation Hall is built, you talk about...
You're going to have to speak up a little bit.
Well, my mic is on, but...
Can you hold it? Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. Is that better?
Yeah.
Once Innovation Hall is built, your slide indicates about half the funds that come from MAPS 4, half from other sources. When all is said and done, who would actually own the building and be responsible for its operation and maintenance?
For Innovation Hall?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I imagine that it can be structured several different ways so that the city could own it, or a city-related nonprofit could own it in order to take advantage of some of the incentives that might be necessary to create that $10 million in matching funds. But all of that is still yet to be determined.
Still up in the air as to how to be designed and implemented.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Monique?
Yeah, that was similar, can you hear me?
No.
That was similar to my question. Oh, there we go. Is that better? Okay.
Better.
That was similar to my question. What private investment do you have already for this matching funds, or where is that money coming from? I would kind of like to see something already put forth in that end.
So the MAPS 4 resolution that was adopted by City Council requires us to identify $10 million in matching funds before the $10 million from MAPS 4 is made available to the Innovation Hall project. Those funds could come from a variety of sources, including, outright private investment, tax increment financing dollars, because that area is in a tax increment financing district. It could also come from other kinds of development incentives that are available, such as new markets tax credits, other tools that real estate development has at its disposal. We do not have any of that identified as of yet. There has been a major project announced for the area that could generate the kind of investment that would be needed to provide that $10 million in matching funds.
Other questions? Yes, Daisy?
Hello, can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Is this project being built on city-owned land, or is there any type of eminent domain being used on this to build this district?
So the renderings that you saw today were all conceptual. And the land where Innovation District Hall is shown is privately owned. It is not owned by the city or the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority or any other public entity. The Henrietta B. Foster Center is owned by the city. It's a part of the Parks and Recreation Department's inventory. And then all of the other kinds of the infrastructure improvements, all of that would be on public right-of-way.
Hello? Okay, I just want to add, I'm excited for this project just because I feel like the city really needs this. I have a lot of, college friends who leave Oklahoma City because they can't find these type of jobs. They always go to the northeast section of it, but we can't do it at the expense, of these neighborhoods that surround these communities. So I'm excited to hear more about the minority-owned building that will be created with this. That's all.
Outstanding. Thank you. Anyone else? Other questions or comments? Okay. Ladies, thank you so much. We appreciate your presentation and being here today.
Thank you all. We appreciate your time.
You bet. All right, next on our agenda, presentation of the Maps for Transit Plan, and I think we have Director of Transit, Jason Fairbrush. Welcome, Jason. Good to have you.
Hey, good morning, committee members. Thank you for having me this morning. Look forward to talking a little transit with the committee. All right, Carrie, we ready to go? All right. Okay, well, it truly is a privilege this morning to be able to share with you what we put together as far as the concept transit plan for the MAPS 4 program. And this morning, as we get started, let's hit the next one. All right, so this morning as we get started, I wanted to begin, sorry about that. I wanted to begin by just being able to provide some background to the committee members as to, how and why did we come up with these projects, right? Because I'm sure if, you're not closely connected to transit, you might have some questions of, well, why did we pick these projects or recommend these projects? And understanding, your role within the community, you may get questions from individuals that you represent. So I'd like to start the presentation really just providing some background as to how we kind of got here, and really remind the committee that what we have included in the MAPS 4 program for transit is really just a continuation of our past really strategic and methodical approach to incrementally improve transit in Oklahoma City. And we've done that primarily by relying on our past planning documents and recommendations from our professional consultants that have helped us. And we've also made those improvements based on what we hear directly from our customers and the community. So the first, piece of background I wanted to share with you was our fixed Guideway plan. And so this was a study that, you may have heard something already about, but basically this was a study conducted back in 2005. It took a look at Oklahoma City and the region, and it said, what could or what should transit look like in the future? And for this study, the future was 2030. And what I would do is direct your attention to the image to the left on the slide. I know that's just a partial image of the community, but it will give you a sense of what all was included in that study and what they looked at. And basically what you do with a transit system such as the one that's been envisioned for the region is you start with a strong backbone or a strong foundation, and that's a fixed route bus system. That's the type of bus service that we operate daily. You've seen the Embark buses providing service throughout the community. That is a fixed route system. And you have to have a really strong, robust fixed route system in order to provide those connections and feed some of those premium transit services like commuter rail and bus rapid transit. So also on the map, you'll see, some green lines, and those represent bus rapid transit corridors. And we'll talk a little bit more about bus rapid transit in the presentation. But the point is, that was also part of the recommendation. We're currently aligning that corridor from recommendations in this study. And then you'll also notice on the map, you'll see some dark blue lines. And that is a vision for commuter rail connecting Edmond, Norman, Oklahoma City, Moore, Del City, and Midwest City. And I'm pleased to report that even that commuter rail transportation is moving forward through the efforts of the Regional Transit Authority of Central Oklahoma. In fact, they just had a town hall meeting engaging the public on that last week. And then finally, if you look in the very kind of center of the map there, is what was recommended as a downtown circulator, a type of transit that would allow people to get where they need to go once they get downtown. And so what do we have today? We have the Oklahoma City streetcar, right? So the point is, we've been incrementally, as a community and with the support of council and the COPPA Board of Trustees, implementing some of these recommendations from the fixed Guideway plan, this plan is still relevant today. The next plan that we have as a reference is our transit service analysis. And think of this as more of a short-range plan, right? We have our Embark fixed route bus system. Our community changes, trip generators change. We have different employers that come and go. So we want to make sure our bus system still serves those areas that need the transit the most. So what we do is periodically update a short-range plan. And the last time we did that was back in 2013. And with our transit service analysis, that's where you really saw the transformation of the Embark bus system. Implementation of those recommendations resulted in much improved frequency. Almost all of our routes now, almost all, not all, almost all are at 30 minutes. We have a very predictable, much easier to use system now, thanks to clock face headways. That's a transit term that basically means buses pulse at the transit center on the hour, 15 after, 30 minutes after, or 45, so it's easier to use. We've also added some services like night service, Sunday service, and so those recommendations, again, have incrementally been added, and that's a result of our transit service analysis. And then the final piece that we use to put together not only past improvements to transit, but what we've proposed in the MAPS 4 projects is customer surveys. We survey our customers, the users of our transit system, every year. We use a professional consulting firm out of Olathe, Kansas, the same firm that does the resident survey for the city of Oklahoma City. So we know those results that we get are statistically valid, and we can apply those really generally to our entire system. And so you can see on the slide here some of the things that we hear directly from our customers is really geared around more frequency, right? More frequency means you got to have more buses out on the street at one time, and more shelters at stops, okay? And so we'll get into that as we look at our specific projects. The other thing we do is transit service is also included in the resident survey that goes out just to, Oklahoma City as a whole. And when we ask people, that are most likely not users of transit, what are some of those characteristics that are important to you if you were to decide to use transit? It's really how often the bus comes by my stop, so that's frequency. Quicker or faster trip times, so that's premium services like BRT and commuter rail, and sheltered stops, right? I mean, in Oklahoma weather, you definitely want to have a sheltered stop. Even on a nice day, it's nice to have a wind block sometimes, right? So that's the idea. So I think what you're going to see through the rest of the presentation is what we've recommended aligns to all these, past recommendations, planning documents, and again, what we're hearing from our customers. So with that, we'll get into the details really of the MAPS 4 transit plan. And so it consists of really 4 components: advanced transit, what we're referring to as enhanced bus, improved bus stops, and then planning for growth. And we'll look at each 4 of those in a little bit of detail. So advanced transit, we have a recommendation of about $60 million of the entire portion projected for transit allocated to advanced transit options, with the majority of that going to BRT. Also, though, included in advanced transit is park and rides and microtransit. And I'll take just a few minutes to kind of explain each one of those categories. So the next slide, you'll see really some images of bus rapid transit. And again, bus rapid transit is pretty common. You see it in a lot of communities with major, well-developed transit systems. And again, I am excited to report that we are in design of our first bus rapid transit for Oklahoma City, which will basically traverse Classen Boulevard and Northwest Expressway all the way out to Meridian. But so with that first Northwest Corridor BRT that we're designing, we've had some opportunities to talk to our community about BRT and do some education. But with the Northwest Corridor, that particular project, as you may know, is funded primarily through federal grants and some of the local funds that are available through city GO bond programs and such. So we do hope to be able to leverage some of the MAPS 4 funding to enhance even our current planning efforts with the Northwest BRT, but that is primarily funded already through other sources. However, with BRT and what we've envisioned for additional BRTs as part of MAPS 4 is you get a really, I say a premium service, but it's a different service than what we are used to seeing within our community. And it starts, one, with vehicles. Bus rapid transit vehicles are generally a bit of an upgrade from a typical fixed route bus. They have a more modern look to them. They're usually branded separately, so it's a distinct service. You're on BRT versus regular fixed route service. Even some of the amenities inside the bus are different. There's a lot of options now for, some nicer flooring in buses. You get into situations where you have, higher back seats that add to the comfort, USB ports for charging mobile devices, those kinds of things, right? So that's a little bit of the difference on the vehicles. That's from with regards to BRT. The other thing is the platforms. So where a customer actually boards and alights from a bus is not a typical bus stop that you see in our community today. It's much more like what you see with the Oklahoma City streetcar, okay? It's an elevated stop platform. There's security lighting, there's a shelter, there's a kiosk so that a customer can purchase their pass at the kiosk or on their mobile device. And there's usually real-time arrival information. So if you've seen any of the streetcar platforms, that should give you a good sense of what we're looking at for BRT. The advantage of that arrangement from the customer experience is that think about an elevated platform. You don't have to step up onto the bus, right? Level boarding is super convenient, but also ADA accessible, right? And there's nothing we propose in MAPS 4 that is not ADA accessible. The other piece of that is imagine boarding and alighting from a bus and really not even have to interact with the fare box, right? You just board, you alight, you get on, you get off. And so again, that's kind of another enhancement. Then really the key difference is frequency and trip time. So with bus rapid transit, what you're looking at is very frequent service. In fact, for the Northwest Corridor BRT that we're planning, we're looking at anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes during peak times, a bus will come by any of the platforms. So what does that mean to a customer? What does that mean to our community? That means there's now a transit service that is pretty much entirely predictable, right? You don't necessarily have to have a schedule in front of you. You're not worried if you just miss the bus and have to wait 30 or 45 minutes. No, a bus is coming by every 12 to 15 minutes. So chances are, if you didn't just miss that last bus, your maximum wait's going to be, 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops. And with the real-time arrival information, the customer's able to be better informed. So that's really kind of the difference in BRT versus a fixed route system. And so what we're looking at for MAPS 4 is a potential of 2 additional corridors, one serving the northeast and one serving the south. And you can see on the slide some of the trip generators to the northeast. Not all of them are listed, but of course the Innovation District that we just heard about, Metro Tech, the zoo. We have the intersection of Martin Luther King and Northeast 23rd. So lots of trip generators, potential trip generators to the northeast. And then, of course, if you think going south, you can't go south without trying to capture Capitol Hill, Southwest Medical Center, other retailers and residential areas to the south. And so again, with the MAPS 4 program, we would be able to have capital funding to construct 1 or 2 additional corridors. And then, of course, the operational funding then becomes the challenge, which we know is separate from the MAPS program. All right. So the next piece of advanced transit is park and rides. So park and rides have been around forever. The only reason we would say they're advanced in this case, right, is because these would be dedicated park and rides for transit users. And although they are common in other places in the country, we don't have any of those here in Oklahoma City, right? And so when we did our transit system, service analysis that I referenced earlier, you know, we did some focus groups. And one of the things we heard from people in the focus groups in terms of like infrastructure or improvements they'd like to see, remarkably, was park and rides kept coming up, right? So the idea would be in MAPS 4, we'd have the capital funding to construct some park and rides to put on the fringe of the bus system, right? So that if a person works or lives too far away from the transit system to really easily connect via, you know, pedestrian trip or cycling, they could drive to a park and ride and then use that transit service that we've invested in to get wherever else they need to go around our city. So the park and rides would be, again, dedicated for those that are basically leaving their vehicle for the day or, you know, a significant amount of time. With that, you would want to have, obviously, plenty of lighting, security features like access control when it's necessary, and those kinds of things. So I have some images here on the slide that would just give you an idea of some other systems. These are transit systems that are basically running parking lots, right? Something COTPA and Embark does every day. But the idea is to combine those two and really make transit more accessible to more people within our community, right? To have a place to park their vehicle in order to use the bus system or transit network. And then finally, we'll talk about microtransit. And really what we have proposed for MAPS 4 is just kind of that first step into this new technology. We would recommend using some capital funds to allow us to purchase a small fleet of multi-passenger vehicles where we could basically pilot some microtransit programs around the city, and those locations would be tied to, in large part, recommendations from that transit service analysis. It even recommended, you know, some zones that we could serve through microtransit. So here's how microtransit works. It's a relatively new term to the industry. The concept itself, the transportation itself isn't all that new, but leveraging the technology, you know, the ability to basically schedule and dispatch trips through a mobile device, that is new. And so we all are familiar with transportation network companies or ride-sharing services. So that's basically what this is, only it's being delivered or managed by the transit agency. Now, it works a little bit differently because with a ride-sharing service, right, you could have a vehicle come pick you up on the northwest side of Oklahoma City, take you to Capitol Hill if you wanted to, right? I mean, there's really no boundaries. The nuance or the difference with microtransit that we're proposing and what we see in the industry is you set up zones. And you have a vehicle serve a particular zone. That zone is usually outside the normal transit network, but it is connected to the network. So again, think of these zones kind of on the fringe of our existing network. And so as a customer of the transit system or a resident of Oklahoma City, you can leverage those zones to basically use your mobile device to request a ride. That operator, that vehicle, will take the customer anywhere within that zone, right, for a certain price, or that each one of those zones is connected to the bus network. So the other option would be you could request a ride, pick you up at your front door or your workplace, and take you to the nearest bus stop, okay? So that's the idea. As a customer using microtransit, you can travel about that zone, or you can connect to the larger transit system. And so why would we look at that? Well, obviously there's a lot of reasons. More flexibility for our customers, more choices, but really it's a trade-off. I mean, there are areas in our city that do request transit from time to time, but the density, the trip generators, it's just not there. It's just not economically feasible to put a fixed route bus out to serve this particular area. But with microtransit, you have a limited number of trips. You can serve it with, you know, one vehicle and then still connect to the bigger bus network. So that's the idea with microtransit. All right, so those are our advanced transit options. And again, I think we started, the slide we looked at estimated about 60 million. So the majority of the transit programs going to advanced transit. Again, thinking about 55 for BRT, about 4 for park and ride, and then, roughly a million or so for the microtransit option. Okay, so switching from advanced transit to enhancing our existing bus system, we really put some thought into, what would it take to, kind of take our existing bus system up to the next level. And we thought, well, what we need to do is at least finish the recommendations from our transit service analysis, which has every bus route at 30-minute frequency. I mean, in the transit industry, that is like the bare bones. If you're going to have functioning transit, you've got to at least have a bus coming by every 30 minutes. But then it also took the next level of recommendations in that transit service analysis, and we looked at our busiest routes and said, wow, what if we could take those to 15-minute frequencies? And that's really where we need to be on a lot of these routes. Now, operating costs are involved in that, and it's much more difficult than simply just buying buses. But what we've proposed in the MAPS 4 program is additional buses to at least begin addressing some of those remaining frequency issues. So with the additional bus piece of our MAPS 4 proposal, we would basically be asking to purchase fixed route buses to take all of our routes to at least 30-minute frequency, and then our 2 busiest routes, routes 5 and route 23, to 15-minute frequency. The other piece of the enhanced bus is traffic signal priority, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. We've learned a lot from traffic signal priority from the Oklahoma City streetcar. We currently have it at most of the intersections where the downtown or where the Oklahoma City streetcar serves downtown. And what traffic signal priority is, and maybe we can go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, jump one more. What traffic signal priority is basically it's technology, right? You have a piece of equipment mounted on each bus. You have a piece of equipment at each signal. That equipment communicates with each other. And what you have is the equipment at the signal can determine when the bus is going to be arriving at that stoplight or traffic signal, if you will. And if the light is currently red, it will try to shorten that red phase so the bus gets a green light when it arrives and can continue moving. On the flip side of that is if the signal is green, then it will try to hold that green longer for the bus to get through the intersection. Now, that's a real simplified explanation. You can set the traffic signal priority up so that maybe it's only in effect when the bus gets behind schedule. You can set the traffic signal priority up based on geofences. So for some intersections, you may want to sense the bus is coming 200-300 feet away. Some may be closer. So there's a lot of flexibility with it. But the deal is with the traffic signal priority, what we've included in MAPS 4, and we can jump back 2 slides if you don't mind, Carrie. We've got a total of about 12.6 million recommended for the enhanced bus piece of the MAPS 4 transit projects. About half of that would go for additional buses. The other half would go for the traffic signal priority. But it's a significant impact in terms of traffic signal priority capabilities. And what I mean by that is, I believe it's of the 491 intersections, signalized intersections within our network, we would be able to add traffic signal priority to about half of those, right? And so, again, when you're thinking about traffic signal priority, improving or maintaining reliability, in some cases shortening trip time if you really have some problem signals. I mean, we've all been on the street network where there's certain signals that just, seem to give you a little bit of delay over others. And there's also a safety aspect to that, right? Because the less times we have a bus stopping, right, at an intersection, then the less likely, obviously, we have of rear-end collisions. And believe it or not, that's our most common type of accident in the bus business is those rear-end collisions, So anyway, definitely a safety component to traffic signal priority as well. All right, we can go ahead and get to our improved bus stops. So this category for our MAPS 4 transit plan, is, as it implies, really making our bus stops better than what they are today. We have worked, very hard over the last few years, adding sheltered stops throughout our network. I hope you've noticed or seen, a lot of new shelters out in our network. And again, reminding you of what we hear directly from our customers and what we hear from residents, sheltered stops are one of those determining factors on either the quality of transit service they receive or the likelihood that they will use transit. Our customers, our residents indicate covered shelters are a big part of that. So what we've done is actually increase the amount of shelters we have within our network pretty significantly over the last few years. We have about 285 stops with covered shelters now. However, with the MAPS 4 program that we've proposed, we would be able to add 500 new additional shelters to our existing network. And those shelters are all ADA accessible. They all have security lighting, trash receptacles. For the MAPS 4 shelters that we've proposed, they would all have bike racks and are very similar to what you see here in this image. And I've got another picture that we'll share as well. And then the other option that we're looking at is adding lighting. So all of our shelters would have lighting, but we'll still have a lot of bus stops that don't, right? And so being able to add lighting to each one of our bus stops would be huge from the standpoint of customer experience, right? I mean, you think about, this time of year when it's dark at 5:30 or 5:45, and there's some areas of our network where we don't have good street lighting. And then, so there's that customer experience piece, but then there's also that safety factor, right? I mean, everybody generally feels a little safer waiting somewhere if they have adequate lighting. And the other piece on the customer service side is, the reality is if someone is waiting at a dark bus stop, unless they're wearing bright clothing, reflective gear, sometimes we miss them. I mean, we do, right? Because it's just very difficult to see sometimes in those areas where there's not a lot of lighting. So on this next slide, we've got a couple of images. We'll start here. So this is really just a map of our current bus stops. And really, currently we have about 20% of our bus stops with covered shelters. With the addition of 500 additional shelters, potentially through MAPS 4, we would have over 700 of our 1,400 total stops with bus shelters, which is huge, right? Over half. So we'd have about 56% of our stops, all with ADA accessible covered shelters. But I just wanted to share this little map with you here to just really show, like, even though we have almost 200 to 300 covered shelters in our system now, if you look at all the little red dots, that's still where shelters are needed. So even with 300 or so shelters, we still have a long way to go. And I know as a committee member, you guys drive around, some of our bus stops are either a pole on some grass or they're a pole with a bench on some grass. And that's really what we're trying to improve and address through MAPS 4. And then on this slide here, again, just an image of the standard shelter that the COTPA Board of Trustees has endorsed. I've talked about most of the components, but I will point out the clear glass. So it's a solid, three solid sides in order to protect from the elements, but also the safety feature, right, of the clear glass. It's highly visible. You can see through it. And then this is just a sample of the lighting, a potential solution to the lighting, which is basically just a solar powered LED light that mounts on top of existing bus stop poles to provide that lighting. All right, I'm about wrapped up here. So we will transition to really kind of the last piece of our program, our series of projects, and that is planned growth. So hopefully when I started the presentation, you noticed, we've been using our plans and we haven't been keeping them on the shelf. We've been implementing them. But, the 2005 fixed Guideway study is now, more than a decade old. And so we want to also, through the MAPS 4 program, set up the future of transit, right? And so we want to do that by having some funds to update additional plans that are needed to continue enhancing transit. So one would be to kind of update that whole, regional plan, the fixed Guideway plan. So look at what does the next 20 to 25 years look like. We looked at some potential areas for BRT corridors. You know, those are just areas that we as staff have looked at, but we'll need some planning experts to come in and help us identify, you know, and lay out those exact corridors. What streets, for example, is that BRT going to run on? And then really, we know, you know, the MAPS 4 program will be over a number of years. And although we're currently looking at updating our existing short-range plan, you know, in 5, 6, 7 years, we'll need to have that updated again if we want to keep our fixed route bus system as relevant as we possibly can. So that's really the idea with some of the funds we have suggested for planning purposes. And then finally, $2 million of the 5 for planned growth, we have allocated for the purchase of land. And, you know, I mentioned additional buses needed for fixed route bus system, bus rapid transit systems as they come on will require additional buses. So, you know, we need places to work and maintain those buses, and we need places for those employees. And, you know, at our current operations center, we're pretty full. So what we would like to do is be able to leverage some of the MAPS fund to acquire land for future expansion. And ideally, you know, and it's always a long process, but ideally, we could take that local fund and show that as a local match for potential federal grants to actually build the facility. So again, trying to leverage that local money into federal dollars in terms of additional transit facilities. All right, so next slide here. We won't spend a lot of time, but maybe you may want to look at this later. But basically, we just have a little matrix here to show on the top, you know, our 4 categories of projects and how they align to not only some of the plans I've mentioned, but also Plan OKC, which we know is a very important document for guiding the future of our city. We've also tried to, I haven't talked a lot about economic development, but with bus rapid transit in particular, there are opportunities for economic development just because of the permanency of bus rapid transit. I mean, the platforms themselves, you know, are roughly $250,000 each to build. So when you put that kind of investment in a corridor, you know, that transit service is going to be there for a while. And developers, hopefully our local development community will latch onto that and know, hey, this transit's going to be here for a long time, and maybe I can put this project along this corridor versus another location. And then accessibility. As I mentioned, we're not proposing anything, including the micro transit service, that would not be ADA accessible. Finally, we have just kind of a look at our overall M4 transit plan. I've talked through these numbers, but it's really just another way to look at how you know, that general allocation of the overall program towards transit could and is being recommended to be split out. Again, as I mentioned, the majority of that for advanced transit. And then finally, with the transit plan that we've proposed, to kind of put that in you know, the takeaway for you, 12 to 14 miles of high-frequency bus rapid transit, weekday bus service frequency of 30 minutes or better for all OKC bus routes. Again, some going to 15. 500 new ADA accessible covered bus shelters. That put our total stops in our system, about 56% of our total stops would have bus shelters. We'd have security lighting at every stop, which, I mean, that's one of the things that I guess I'm most optimistic about, is like just imagining every one of our stops with security lighting. I don't think you're going to find that in a lot of transit systems. And then multiple park and ride facilities. And then recall the technology we talked about, the traffic signal priority, and then the micro transit. So thank you for letting me run through that. I know that was a lot of information. Appreciate your time, and I'm glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much. That was a really in-depth presentation, so thank you so much. Questions?
Jason, I'm kind of intrigued by the micro transit system that you mentioned. You talked about a smaller vehicle. Mm-hmm. And so can you kind of fill us in on, you know, how many passengers would be in on that type of vehicle? And then also, could you explain geographically, like one thought that comes to mind is that a micro transit system would benefit, say, the airport and for people that are wanting to get to and from the airport, for example, to downtown. So if you could expound upon that a little bit, that would be quite helpful, please.
Sure. Yeah, so what, and again, the microtransit is in development, but one of the things we would like to do is, I mentioned, smaller multi-passenger vehicles. We are very sensitive to the customer experience. We're very sensitive to attracting new people to transit. And so if we could provide that service in some type of, smaller van or SUV, that might hold 2 to 3 passengers. A lot of those, realistically, are probably going to be single trips, so you don't need a big vehicle. There's also advantages to fuel efficiency, running a smaller vehicle. And quite frankly, I think our community, and I know I would be, if I wanted to summon a single trip using microtransit, I'd love to have a small van or SUV come and pick me up versus, a big 15-passenger type vehicle. So we're sensitive to that, but also, and again, I can't say it enough, we would also have an ADA solution available if that type of vehicle didn't work for every one of our customers. So that's kind of what we're thinking about in terms of vehicles. And then yeah, on the areas where we would locate them, if we could go back, Carrie, could we flip back to the system map, just any of those maps, even, well, yeah, keep going. Yeah, we can go here. So yeah, the airport, you'll note, so exactly, we want to put the microtransit really where you don't see dots, right? We want to put it on the fringe where there's not existing transit service. And we do know we do not have transit service to our airport right now. So microtransit could be a solution for that. I would also say, pick your quadrant, southwest, southeast, northwest, northeast. We all are aware of residential developments. Our city is growing, it's growing on the fringes, and we're all aware of those developments that are outside of our service area, but could be served by a microtransit zone to connect to the bigger system.
Thank you very much.
Great question. Other questions? Yes, Harry?
Particularly with you're talking about the traffic signal priority system. I was just wondering, I've been in other cities where you could link to that either by an app or by a phone number to determine the bus progress in real time. Is that on the horizon at all?
Yeah, actually, we currently have that technology, and it is planned for the future bus rapid transit and even the fixed route additions that we would make through Maps 4. So really, right now in our fixed route bus system, we have AVL technology, automatic vehicle locators, on all of our fixed routes. So we currently have the ability for customers to access real-time bus arrival information with any of our fixed route system. We also have that ability on our Oklahoma City streetcar system. You've seen the estimated arrival times at the platforms. And then the streetcar system actually takes that a step further, and if you haven't, I encourage you to check out the website. You can actually look and see the location of any of the streetcars that are in service along the route. So we do have that technology, and that's one of the basic amenities that you have to have, particularly for BRT, because again, thinking of a platform, you arrive at the platform, you buy your pass, you want to look at an electronic sign. I know the bus is going to be here in 5 minutes. And so that's how we would handle it. Now that is different from traffic signal priority. The traffic signal priority is just simply, the equipment on the bus and the equipment at the signal itself communicating with each other. But
okay, thanks.
Did that? Okay.
Other questions? Yes, Minnie?
Yes, I have a question. How many riders do you currently have on transit, mass and transit that you have today?
Okay. So, great question. I'd like to, if I could, answer that from the standpoint of our ridership during a normal year, right? We have currently, with the environment that we're operating in now, we have capacity constraints, so we don't allow as many people on a bus as could be on the bus. So outside of this 2020 time period, we typically provide over 3 million passenger trips per year with our transit service. And most of that comes from, our fixed route bus service. So the other way to look at that is think about, on average, about 10,000 trips a day, right? So that's a lot of trips getting people to where they need to go, right? Whether it's work, whether it's a medical appointment, maybe it's shopping. But yeah, so I don't know, does that give you a sense of the ridership or?
Yeah, that gives me some sense. And then my next question is, what about, what is the income that you receive from people who ride on a regular basis?
So income, meaning the revenue that goes in to support our operations, like
Yes.
money we have coming in where we can pay our
Right,
fuel.
like
mechanic-
individual
yeah.
riders, yeah.
So that's a really good question too, and that's something that we have to continue to remind our community of with public transit. It's public transit. It's a public service. We recover in a good year, roughly 10% of our operating costs through what we would call fare box revenue, right? Okay. So when a customer uses transit service and they pay a fare to use that service, it really only covers generally about 10% of the costs.
Okay. And
Which, I'm sorry, I was going to add one more detail to that, which is why, some of the projects we have in the MAPS 4 program, like BRT and additional fixed route buses that require those operating dollars are really going to be, they're just going to be challenging, and the sequencing is going to have to be really important because we got to have the operating dollars to go along with the capital.
okay. And then, is there a plan to include other cities so that we can have, because in my area, we do have people who need to go from Oklahoma City, maybe like to Moore or to Midwest City. Is there a plan that is put together to help those smaller metro cities that are surrounding us to get involved in our transportation in Oklahoma City?
So, so there is. So the plan for that regional transportation is really a long-term play that is kind of outside the scope of MAPS 4, right? Because we're just kind of looking at Oklahoma City projects and Oklahoma City dollars. But I think it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about what the Regional Transit Authority of Central Oklahoma is doing, which Embark, COTPA, the city are heavily involved in. And so that is really what the RTA's mission, if you will, is to do, is to make, in fact, the RTA is comprised of 6 different cities, right? So we have Edmond, Norman, Moore, Oklahoma City, Midwest City, and Del City. Each of those cities have representatives that serve on the board of directors of that RTA. And the RTA, that is really their ultimate goal, is regional transportation. So if you do live in Midwest City and you want to get to downtown, it doesn't really, it's a seamless transportation system, right? It doesn't really matter. We're a ways from that, but that's the vision.
Great. Yeah, Stacy.
Hi, is it working? Oh, yes. So is there a plan to make the park and ride successful? I know Oklahoma City kind of just is oriented towards cars and vehicles. So how is that going to be kind of planned out to make sure that people who probably don't think about taking public transit do take it?
Yeah. Well, so you're right. I mean, it's definitely a challenge in our car-centric community. But I think what the park and ride is going to do is it's going to give us a platform to educate our community on combining, right, that automobile and transit trip. We're going to have a lot of people that might be, they may be reluctant or unsure, should I use transit or not? But you know what? Hey, if I can still leave my house in my car, drive to a secure park and ride, and then I can hop on the BRT to take me from, in this case, Meridian and Northwest Expressway, downtown or along Classen where I work, hey, maybe I'm going to try that. So I really think the success of the advantage of the park and rides is going to be, it's going to be able to give us an opportunity to educate our community that doesn't use transit and really add an amenity that we don't have now. And I would say probably, just off, the top of my head, the kind of that first or that premier park and ride we would want to look at would be a park and ride facility at the end of the line for the current Northwest Corridor, BRT, right there. If you're familiar with Northwest Oklahoma City, the Northwest Expressway and Meridian there, there's already a small surface parking lot. But, imagine, all those neighborhoods and businesses out past Meridian. I mean, we know how, populated that area is. Being able to, again, like I described, drive to a park and ride and then say, I think I'll let the city or Embark finish my driving from here. That's what we're going to try to do.
Yeah, I'm really interested how that can work with the Innovation District, just because, all those facilities are going to be clustered together. I don't know, maybe looking into kind of like making parking I can't talk. Using less space for parking spots and kind of just forward pushing this park and ride and new developments that we're creating.
Yeah, it is. I know it's difficult to talk sometimes with these things on. So, but yeah, so you brought up the Innovation District, and particularly with the bus rapid transit corridor to the northeast, it would serve the Innovation District, and providing a really quick, efficient connection between downtown and the Innovation District has always been one of the things that's been important to us as transit professionals. It's like, do you do that through BRT? Do you do that through streetcar? All we know is we need a efficient connection. And so, with that connection, maybe there's some more opportunities, whether it be a park and ride or it's leveraging existing parking. I mean, we have ample public parking in even Embark parking garages now, and a quick connection from downtown to the Innovation District could solve some of that as a potential.
I think Brenda has a question.
Brenda and then Bob.
I wanted to ask you if you've considered allocating some funds for additional signage, maybe to the existing bus stops, and then also maybe for the new projects that you're considering. Particularly, I wanted to know if you considered some Spanish signage, being strategic to where that community in Oklahoma City is growing. And also some of the marketing services to better serve our community, if some funds are being allocated for that.
Yeah, okay, so I'll take the question about the signage, and then I think the Spanish translated documents second. Okay, so with signage, I really appreciate the question. We have signage at every one of our Embark bus stops, right? So if you see a bus stop without signage, let us know. We'll put another sign up there because somebody has done something to it. And what's really fascinating about the signage, and you're right on point with how important that signage is it was like 2 to 3 years after we rebranded our system, right? With the Embark name. We had incredible brand recognition. I don't know exact numbers, but let's just say 60% or so after we rebranded. And when we did our surveys, we asked, well, how do you know about Embark? The majority of people was like the signage at the bus stop. So you're right. I mean, the signage is so important. So every one of our bus stops now, and anything we add in the future, will have at least the base signage that we have now, which is not only in fact, Carrie, can we back up, see if we can get us, okay, there you go. So if you can see that bus stop sign right there, you'll notice it not only has the, the identifier that it's a bus stop, it also has the route that it serves. So that's on Route 38. And then, I don't know, I think that's unique stop ID, the little bitty sign kind of under the two larger ones, that's a unique stop ID. So every stop in our system has a unique stop ID. I believe that one's 217, but I can't really tell, but it doesn't matter. And so that unique stop ID is one way an individual can access real-time arrival information, right? They put in that unique stop ID. So we've been really sensitive to making sure we have that information. Now, admittedly, we have not considered like a Spanish translation on our signage. We do, however, though, continue to try to translate more and more of our documents that are on our website, making those available in Spanish. I know, for example, with the separate, but we do support the RTA, the town hall meeting that we had last week. We had Spanish translator throughout that entire virtual meeting. So it's something we are sensitive to. We need to continue to get better and look for opportunities. So any type of partnership in that area, especially in those communities, we want to serve and we want to be able to communicate with them.
Yeah, just a bit of a follow-up to what Daisy and Brenda have raised. Will any of the MAP funds be allocated as a council resolution permit funds to be used for public education and public relations as these routes are created and implemented to let people know that they're out there rather than just depending on word of mouth to find out about it?
Well, we did not propose any of those soft costs, if you will, related to the projects as part of the MAPS 4 program, but we know we have to do that, and we as an agency would be prepared to leverage other resources for it. We know how important it is, and the fact is we've done it before. We know how to do it. We did it when we rebranded our system. We did it when we launched the Oklahoma City streetcar. We're in the process of branding, and we'll do the same with the Northwest BRT. And you know, there are some even some federal funds that are available for some of those purposes, congestion mitigation, air quality funds to educate and promote the use of public transit. So we won't overlook it, but it's really not included in this program.
Okay, great. Anyone else? No? Fantastic. Jason, thank you so much for your presentation and your taking questions and giving us some great answers.
Yep, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. So moving to our next item C, presentation on the MAPS 4 implementation plan. I think Jason Cotton will be presenting from ADG.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we've asked Jason to come up here and give this group an update on what has been going on. This is not a presentation for the finished plan. This is a progress report. And Jason's office and my office have been working really hard on getting there. So I want to turn it over to Jason so he can show you what's transpired so far.
And I think from looking at the presentation that you put in the packet, obviously this is kind of a review of MAPS 3 so that we can begin to conceptualize the components, the complexity, and the process that ADG has to go through in putting together the MAPS 4 implementation plan. So, and I think you speak a little bit to that at the end, but this is kind of for us to start wrapping our brains around all of the different pieces we'll need to consider. Okay, Jason.
So good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Thank you guys for having us. I know we've already been here for a little over an hour now, so everybody's worn out, but I promise to get you to lunch just as quickly as I can. So thank you for giving us an opportunity to present to you guys this morning. So as David said, for those of you that have flipped through the slides maybe yesterday or this morning, we are not presenting the implementation plan this morning. So I'm sorry to disappoint any of you that have not looked at it yet, but we are not there yet. Rest assured, we're working very hard. I think the thing that occurred to us, particularly after the last board meeting, there is just a lot of information to get through on the MAPS 4 program. I mean, we've spent, a little over an hour this morning talking about 2 projects. And so if you think about it in a way, this implementation plan has got to touch all 16 projects. And so trying to lead this group through that process, it's going to take some time. And so what we've talked about a lot as a team with David's office is this need to kind of take this a bite at a time, a piece at a time. And so we're really thinking a lot about how to lead the board through this planning process in a really purposeful way, a deliberate way, a thoughtful way. And so really today is about kind of the first step in that process. And so we felt like the best place to start is maybe with just a conversation about what the implementation is, what it contains, what the process is that we would use to develop that. And so as we started to think about that, we thought, what's a good way to do that? And maybe it is looking backwards at the MAPS 3 implementation plan. And so a lot of our conversation this morning, as Teresa said, will be about that. And so I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I thought I was going to have a clicker, so Carrie's helping me out. So Carrie, if this goes south, this is all your fault this morning. So So anyway, so again, the MAPS 3 implementation plan, a point of reference, is kind of how we've thought about it in our office. If you look back at the MAPS 3 implementation plan, in our minds, there's really kind of these 5 areas or categories of information that we feel like that plan communicates. And so you can see the way that we've organized this information here. We think, in looking back at the plan, there's some time spent on background and history, really just telling the history of the MAPS program, all of the initiatives that came before, in this case, the MAPS 3 program. There's also a collection of information. We call it program summary information, but it really contains a lot of different things. So it talks about the funding for the program, how the program was intended to be governed, as well as kind of a description of how the projects were intended to be executed. And so that's kind of all in that area of the plan. There's also obviously information on each one of the projects. If you've looked at the plan, there's a page. It provides a description of the project. It talks about the scope of the project. And so that's done on a per project basis. Also on those sheets, there's also project budgets that are communicated. So, you know, if you think back to MAPS 3 as a little bit different animal, the sales tax issue was $777 million for 8 projects. And so there was this exercise that we went through, and again, I wasn't a part of that, but based on my conversations with other people in our office, there was an exercise that happened to allocate that $777 million across the projects, but also then another level further, which is how are we going to spend the money inside of each one of those projects. And so that's a lot of the information that, when you look back at the MAPS 3 plan today, that information is communicated in the implementation plan. And then lastly, really probably one of the more important things is the program schedule. And so obviously the goal here is to give you guys, the board and the public, a picture of how we think the program is going to be executed, the order that the projects will be in, the duration of those projects. And so there's a lot of information in the back of the plan in that regard, and that has really guided a lot of the work that we've done over the last 10 or 12 years. And so I want to take you guys through each one of these a little bit and talk about each one of them in a little more detail. Next slide. Next slide. So looking back at the MAPS 3 implementation plan, as I said, there's the background and history that's provided. It talks about the previous initiatives primarily. So rewind back 2000, this is about 2011, I believe, that this got put together. And so if you read back at the plan, it's telling the MAPS 1 story, the original maps, you know, all the projects that were contained there. And we've heard from some of the previous mayors that were involved in that, so I don't feel like I need to tell that story again, but certainly a lot of that information is in the plan. Maps for Kids, the kind of the second generation of that, is also discussed in the plan, and so there's a lot of background information included in the implementation plan about that. And really, when you look at this background and history in the MAPS 3 implementation plan, you know, just some basic information is provided. The timeline of the program, what the goals of the program were, and also kind of what the financial structure was of those programs, those previous programs. Next slide. So really after the implementation plan, after it kind of takes you through kind of that story, telling you the MAP story, it really, if you will, it makes this case for continuing the investment. And so it talks a little bit about what the impacts of those programs have been on the city of Oklahoma City, all the additional public and private investment that occurred following that. You know, you heard Kathy talk about that a little bit this morning, and how the business community was changed as a result of those initiatives. And so again, that's all contained in the plan and is an important part of what was presented to the public back in 2011. So program summary information, as I said, this contains a lot of different information. If you go to the next slide, Carrie. So the first kind of area of information that's included is what I would call program funding. And so it talks a lot about the program inception, how the program was conceived, how it was conceptualized, how the Oklahoma City residents were involved in the development of the program. And so a lot of that information is included in the plan. There's also a conversation about when the voter authorization and when that occurred and what the results of the election were. And then finally, as it relates to program funding, it talks about sales tax collection. So the dates over which the sales tax was collected, how much anticipated revenue was going to be generated. Again, just all really basic information about the MAPS 3 program. And so after it talks about program funding, it also talks a little bit about program governance. And so there's this explanation of how the program was to be guided. So there's a conversation about the MAPS 3, the project subcommittees that probably most of you are well aware of now. It's how it was to be assembled, how it was to meet, how it was to make recommendations to the Citizens Advisory Board, and then also kind of similar information about the Citizens Advisory Board and its responsibility to council. And so this structure is really explained in the MAPS 3 implementation plan. It's really familiar to us all now, but it is pertinent, I think, on the MAPS 4 program because the MAPS 4 program is very similar to this, and so it'll be important that we communicate that as a part of this implementation plan. Next slide, please. After it talks about governance, there's a lot of time spent, and I think it's a lot of value to the document itself about the project execution and how the projects are actually executed. And so it really kind of paints this picture of how, once the implementation plan was adopted, how it was anticipated that the projects would be carried out. And so we've kind of tried to characterize all of that information into kind of these 4 primary phases of work. And again, I'm explaining this because this is pertinent. This will probably be something that we need to accomplish for the MAPS 4 plan. But really, project execution, it starts with planning. There's a lot of project research and preliminary programming development, budget development that occurs kind of at a staff level. Once that's accomplished, we move into what I would call a pre-design phase, or we consider a pre-design phase. And so that's frequently the phase of a project where you're selecting architects and engineers. As a board, sometimes you'll see people come forward with recommendations on a consultant selection or a notice authorization for to enter into contract with a consultant. And so all of that work happens in this pre-design phase. There's frequently things going on as it relates to operators, possibly operator interviews, operator selections, operator agreements, and possibly even site acquisition too. Sometimes that happens during pre-design. But really, once we get through pre-design, really we get into the design phase. And so this is when our architects and our engineers are designing the project. As a board, you will probably see those design teams coming forward, giving you updates on where they're at in the design. At some point in the process, they'll issue what's called a preliminary report, and that has to be approved by the board and council. And so there'll be points in time throughout the design process that you will see these projects. And so the MAPS 3 implementation plan really kind of described this in some detail. And so I think it was a lot of value, I think, in terms of that plan. Really, once we get through design, the plan goes on to explain construction. Obviously, that's pretty obvious what happens during the construction phase, a lot of the site preparation work, the actual construction of the facilities. And so really these areas are really explain the continuum of how a project is carried out under the MAPS 4 program. The one thing I would say is, Carrie, if you could click one time, the planning phase is a phase that frequently happens before things get to subcommittee, before things get to the board potentially. And so it's a lot of work on staff's part, on our part, trying to get the project ready to move forward. One thing that I wanted to illustrate or talk to the board about this morning a little bit was how long it takes to get through this process. So some of you, I know on the board, have been involved in the MAPS 3 program, and so you probably have some feel for this, but I think for the benefit of the group, it might be good to show an example. So I've gone back and looked at just one of the MAPS 3 projects just to give, again, the board an idea of how long it takes us to get through this process. So you can see, as I said, planning, that's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes without the board's involvement, really. But you can see pre-design, maybe 4 months it took us about 4 months to get through that process, about 19 months of design for the Whitewater facility, and about 26 months of construction. So you add all that up, the Whitewater facility, which was by far not the biggest facility or the biggest project in the MAPS 3 program, a little under 5 years from start to finish. And so it's not to say that there's anything, the process is very tried and it works. There's just a lot of steps in it. And so I think it's important as a board that you understand that it will take us a while, once the plan is adopted, to move through these projects. So next slide. So, and go to the next one, please. So project descriptions and scopes. I thought the best way to kind of communicate this information, I brought with me just a couple of excerpts out of the MAPS 3 implementation plan. And so really this information, as I said earlier, it's presented on kind of a page by page basis, project by project. So each project has a sheet in the implementation plan. And really the thing that's important as it relates to the project descriptions is really at the top of the page. Carrie, could you click forward one? And so it's the top of the page that really describes the project and provides these descriptions. And so I think from our perspective, we would characterize the majority of this information as kind of fitting into one of three buckets. And so there's in this example, this is the Oklahoma City Convention Center. So you guys can obviously read through that text, but you'll see that there is some attempt at identifying the vision for the project. So in this case, it was replacing the aging convention center. There's a conversation in the narrative about the goals of the project. So it talks about attracting larger conventions and bringing additional revenue into the economy. And so that's a really important part, we feel like, of this description as you look back. And then there's also this project scope. And so for the convention center, as you read down through that text, you'll see that there's really specific information included on the convention center. And so it's talking about the size of the program, different programmatic elements within the project, and how big those are going to anticipated to be. And so it's this really clear picture of that project that, and really, in reality, guided that project, has guided that project all the way through the MAPS 3 program. And so another example I would like to provide, if you'll click to the next one, Carrie, is the senior health and wellness. And so, again, we see this project vision. If you could click one more, Carrie, you can see the text there again. Again, you can see the project vision, state-of-the-art senior health and wellness center, the goals for this project: encouraging a healthy lifestyle, providing a gathering place, reflecting needs of surrounding community. But if you look really closely at the scope, you'll notice that this feels a little bit different than the convention center. It's got a lot of good information as it relates to what programming may be included in the facility. But you can see, like, as an example, there's no square footage is included here. And so the point that we're trying to drive home with this is, if you think back to 2010, 2011, when this was being put together, each one of the 8 projects were understood to a different level of detail. And so I think that this board should think about that as we're moving forward. I mean, there will be some of the MAPS 4 projects that we will understand in great detail. There will be some that we'll be trying to figure out as we're going. So I think it's important for the board to understand that each one of these projects in MAPS 3 were a little bit different. They were treated a little bit different. And so it would not shock me if we get to that same place as a part of the MAPS 4 program. Carrie, next slide, please. So project budgets, as I said, it's not only about how much money is being spent on the projects. I think the one thing about the MAPS 4 program, we have, I don't even know how many pages the resolution is. It's several. There's a lot of detailed information to guide the MAPS 4 program. So we have a really clear picture of how much money is spent on each project, but perhaps what's even, we need to take that to the next level, so in terms of organization. And so if you look back at the MAPS 3 plan, you'll see on these project sheets that budget for the convention center, as an example, was further refined and broke into these various categories. And so these are some of the common ones. I would suspect that we will see these as a part of the MAPS 4 implementation plan. Land acquisition and site prep, obviously, that involves purchase of property and easements and all of those things. There's frequently, you'll see a budget category for design and testing and administration. Those are money, the portion of the budget spent on architects and engineers and consultants and all the people and teams it requires to execute a project. Project contingency, those are dollars that are basically set aside at the beginning of the project just for unexpected expenses. And then really the last two categories, FF&E, construction. For those of you that don't know, FF&E is just furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so it's all the things you need to open up a building and get it operational on day one. And so there's dollars identified in the MAPS 3 implementation plan for that, as well as construction. Those last two are kind of combined in the MAPS 3 implementation plan. And so I don't know, I think we're still working through that a little bit. Obviously, we have some idea of what those costs are individually, but I'm not sure exactly how that will shake out in the next plan. But as an example, just to give you, again, trying to give you a feel for some of the projects in MAPS 3. So this is the Wellness Center 3 that's about to start construction or has started construction. So $11.7 million at the time of plan adoption. And if you do the math, this is about how that budget breaks out. And so you can see we got about 9% on land acquisition and site prep, 12% on design, testing, and admin, about 5% project contingency. And really, the way that we approach these budgets is we set all those dollars aside, we understand what those costs might be, and what's left is the dollars that we have available for construction and FF&E. That's really kind of how we put the budgets together. Just one more example. Obviously, this is on the other end of the spectrum in terms of size, $252 million convention center. Again, these are the original budgets in the original MAPS 3 implementation plan. But you can see these budgets, percentage-wise, are kind of similar. You can see construction and FF&E, I think on the other one was about 73, is about 76% in this case. So again, the city has a lot of experience in executing projects, just like the ones included in MAPS 4. They understand what these costs are going to be, and so we structure the budgets based on their knowledge and our experience with all of these projects and with this program. So, Carrie, next slide. So the program schedule, as I said, probably the most important part, or one of the most important parts of the implementation plan. And so I don't know how familiar this page looks to the group, but this is in the back of the MAPS 3 implementation plan. Obviously, it's providing a picture of how the program was anticipated to be executed. I think some things I would like to point out, though, I mean, obviously all 8 of the projects are listed individually, but if you look really close, there's actually what I would call sub-projects identified, and so you can't obviously see it on this slide, but on the park as an example, there's a discussion in the implementation plan about an upper park and a lower park. And so the schedule and the implementation plan almost kind of provides a framework by which the project is executed. And so the program schedule communicates that, and the MAPS 3 implementation plan, the schedule associated with that communicates that. You can see also that in addition to the framework, there's a lot of different phases inside each one of the projects that's identified. And so, you can't see them. I've listed them over on the left side of the slide. You know, there's phases of work including partner development, so that's operator agreements and things like that. Pre-construction, A&E, design, which is essentially design work, land acquisition, site prep. Some of these things you'll see are similar to some of the components of the project execution that we talked about just a little bit earlier. Procurement. I think on the MAPS 4 plan, or the MAPS 3 implementation plan, a lot of the procurement was related to procurement of streetcars, rails for the streetcar system, and so there was some allotment in the schedule for that. And then obviously construction. That's the end of most of these projects is whenever they get constructed. Okay, so move forward. So one of the things that informs the MAPS, that inform the MAPS 3 program schedule as much as anything is just the financial model. And so MAPS 3 was no different than MAPS for Kids or MAPS 1. It's a pay-as-you-go model, and I know we've all talked about that and are somewhat familiar with that, but I wanted to just make it, try to make it as crystal clear as possible exactly what that means and what implications that has on our schedule. And so I brought with me just an example. These are not actual numbers. These are just for illustrative purposes, but I'm just trying to get a point home here. So in this example, let's say April of 2010, we have sales tax collections of $3 million. Carrie, you're going to have to help me. I'm sorry about this. Click one more. So May and June, you can see we've added another $6 million in May, which brings our cumulative sales tax collections to 9. June, we collect another 9, and we end up at $18 million in cumulative collections. And so if you continue this forward for a few months, you can see every month we're adding a bit. David mentioned this morning, you guys reviewed the revenue and expenditures report. And so $49 million available in October. So let's assume for a second that in October that we engage with a design team to start design work on a project. And so that in October of 2010, that's a $2 million obligation that we've made. Doesn't mean the city has written that design firm a $2 million check. What it simply means is those funds are obligated, and from that point forward, they have to be available to pay that liability. And so in this example, if you could make one click here, you can see that our $49 million in cumulative sales tax collections, we now have access to about $47 million of it. And so if you kind of carry this thought forward, if you click once, we have all the revenue from all the months. You can imagine as we start laying project on top of project on top of project, we have all these obligation projections. And so as we do all of that, the financial model, if you click one slide, Carrie, really looks something like this, right? Every month we have a certain amount of funds that are available to be obligated. And so that becomes a really important data point for us in trying to figure out how to put this schedule together. And so if you click one more, the MAPS program operates in the green area on this slide. We can never obligate funds in excess of funds that we have on hand or funds available for obligation. The red part of this slide, obligating funds more than we have available, that's essentially debt, and that does not work in a pay-as-you-go model. And so I just want to make sure you guys understand what we're doing here. If you could click one more slide, Carrie. So one thing I want to also, you can probably gather it from this description, like there is, because of this, something that is also that we have to deal with, which is how big a project is and how long it takes us to accumulate those funds. And so you think about, this is probably more of an issue in the MAPS 3 program. If you think back to when it started, I mean, we had a $250+ million convention center. And so it takes some time to save $250 million, $9 or $10 million a month. And so it kind of implies this idea that we need more time to accumulate those funds for larger projects. Smaller projects could maybe move a little up in the program schedule because there's not as much of an obligation that's needed. So that's really kind of the financial model. And as I said, it's an important part of putting this schedule together. I will tell you, putting this implementation plan together, the schedule together, it's not just a mathematical exercise. I've heard Tom McDaniel say a couple of different times that he thought MAPS 3 was the biggest algebra problem in the world. And if it was just algebra, it would be easy because there's a lot of people that know algebra and can do that. It's a little bit of art and it's a little bit of science. And so in addition to this, Carrie, if you could go to the next slide, there's some other considerations that we have to think about when we put together the program schedule. And so I want you to kind of think back, put yourself back in the shoes of that board, those teams, the people that were involved in the MAPS 3 plan, 2010, 2011, and what kind of questions that they were asking themselves about the projects in the MAPS 3 program. And so I've kind of broken these into a few different areas. As it relates to existing facilities, they were probably asking themselves questions about if there was an existing facility in the city that would provide the service that was kind of considered under the MAPS 3 program. And so, or if a facility did exist, what kind of condition it was in, or if it could provide the service that was needed to the residents of Oklahoma City. And so I think those are all really important questions that they were likely asking themselves. Site and location related questions, my guess is, we're sitting here in 2021 now. I think most of us probably know the whole story of the convention center. It was in various locations at various times, but certainly as we sit here today trying to put a plan together, we need to start thinking about, do we really understand where it's located? And if we don't, do we need to allot some time in the schedule for that? And so that's an important question. How involved, if we don't have a site, how involved is the site acquisition process going to be? There's time that needs to be allotted in the schedule for that. And so there's also a question of preparation, site preparatory work. And so on a lot of the projects, there may be franchise utilities, OG&E and all the communication companies, natural gas companies. They may have facilities that need to be relocated. The city of Oklahoma City may have public utilities that needs to be relocated. There may be environmental concerns and environmental remediation that needs to happen. And so these are all things that we need to think about as we're putting together the plan. As it relates to the operator, I think there's a group of questions that probably informed the MAPS 3 implementation plan, the schedule. Whether or not an operator had been identified, if an operator has been identified, if there was an operating agreement in place, how extensive that process might be, and if the operator needs any additional time to get ready to operate the facility. And so I think to further kind of illustrate this, and because I think it's really pertinent as it relates to MAPS 4, these are all questions that we should be working through as a part of that program. As you can imagine, in MAPS 3, every one of the projects answered these questions in a different way. They were all over the spectrum. And so to kind of illustrate, and so if you will, you can imagine that answers to some of these questions might push a project up or it might push it back. And so to kind of drive this point home, I've got a couple of illustrations. So Carrie, if you could go to the next slide. So as we think about these questions, we think about existing facilities. It may be that there's facilities that currently exist in the city that provide the service or some form of the service. Looking back at MAPS 3, the trails and sidewalks part of that program. Now, while there wasn't a trail around Lake Draper at the beginning in 2010 or 11, certainly there were other trails and there were other sidewalks in the city. And so that's really, I think, the point that I'm trying to drive home here in this example. Site and location. It could be that the site location is not understood. And so because of that, we need to allot time in the schedule and push that project back. It could be that there's an extensive site acquisition process that's required, or that there's a lot of preparation work that needs to be done. And so examples of that, the Oklahoma City Convention Center, which we've already talked about a little bit this morning. And then the operator. So it could be that there's operator selection required, there's no operating agreements in place, there's no precedent for those operating agreements. And so examples that I think of from the MAPS 3 program are probably Wellness Center 1 is probably the clearest example. We did 4 of these, or we will have done 4 of these in a short amount of time, but I'm going to tell you, and I wasn't here, but I've heard stories. Wellness 1 was painful for everybody. It was the first time the city had been through that process, but I can tell you by Wellness 2 it was better, and by Wellness 3 it was even better, and so on. So it's important to think about how that influences the schedule and how it needs to be reflected in the schedule that we develop. So the other end to all these questions, really kind of the converse of everything that I just explained. So it could be existing facilities that there's currently not facilities in the area which provide the necessary service, or there's no way for the residents to go to find that service. And so in MAPS 3, I think about the Whitewater facility. And it could be that the site location is relatively known, that the process for acquiring the site is relatively straightforward. There's not a lot of site preparation work. A good example of that may be Wellness Center number 2 out of the MAPS 3 program. And then as it relates to the operator, again, the converse of what I just described in the previous slide, it could be that our operator is known, that there's not an operating agreement required, and it could be that the operator that's operating the facility is ready to operate it on day 1. And so as I look back at the MAPS 3 implementation plan, those projects, probably the best example of that, and there may be others, is probably the Bennett Event Center. If you think about the State Fairgrounds operating that, they were ready to go on day 1. And so it enabled us to move that project towards the front of the program a little bit. So that's it. So that's all we got to do. It's that easy. So obviously there's a lot of stuff to dig through here. But really just kind of in summary, again, all of these things are contained in the MAPS 3 implementation plan. I am really sharing this with you. We're sharing this with you just to give you a point of reference. It's the things that team wrestled with and struggled with and went through, again, 2010, 2011. And really, it's the charge that's in front of this board and in front of us sitting here in 2021. So if you go to the next slide. So I think with the time we have left, and I'm almost done. I know everybody wants to go to lunch. I'm trying to hurry, but I want to talk to you a little bit more about the MAPS 4 implementation plan. And so I've talked to you about what the MAPS 3 plan was like, the information it included. But there's some ways that this program, this plan is likely going to be different. And so, Carrie, if you could go to the next slide. So one of the most obvious things is the addition of the MAPS 3 story. The MAPS 3 implementation plan had the story of MAPS 1 and MAPS for Kids. And so we get this great honor to tell the MAPS 3 story in this document. And so obviously, you're getting ahead of me, Carrie. We get this opportunity to tell this story in this document. And so that's obviously something that will be added to the plan and will be a great opportunity to do that. Now you can go to the next one. I will tell you from our perspective, I think one thing that's clearly different about the MAPS 4 program, and I've already spoke about it a little bit this morning, is just the scale of the program. $1 billion in public investment. I mean, just let that sink in, $1 billion. And it's not just across 8 projects, it's across 16 projects. And every one of those projects has parts and pieces, some of them a lot of parts and pieces. And so there's just a lot of information to get through. I've brought this graph here. This is something that I've looked at with David and Todd in the MAPS office. Just to give you an idea of what we're wrestling with, you can see there's really 3 colors here. So the blue bar is the number of projects in the original initiative, and we couldn't find any data on MAPS 1, but we've been involved in MAPS for Kids and MAPS 3. So I think the thing I really want to draw your attention to is the MAPS 3, MAPS 4 comparison. And so 8 projects in MAPS 3. If you go through the implementation plan, I talked a little bit earlier about phases of work or sub-projects. There's 26 sub-projects identified in the implementation plan for MAPS 3. So sitting here today, we went back and did some research. There's essentially, with those 26 sub-projects sitting here today in 2021, there's 138 separate contracts that the MAPS office has administered during the life of that program. So if you take that and you move that forward, and this data is actually a little bit old, you can see, I mean, obviously we've got the 16 projects, that's double of MAPS 3. Here I'm saying 61 estimated phases of work. Sitting here today, we think that may be as much as 80 or 90 plus. And so if you kind of extrapolate, you can see the heavy lift that this program is going to be. Potentially some 300 some odd different contracts that the MAPS office will be administering through the life of this program. And so what I'm trying to drive home here is there is just a lot to MAPS 4. There's a lot to unpack. And so I think that the implementation plan is going to reflect that. So there's also the operation funds, the operation maintenance funds, the capital improvement funds, the involvement of the trust. That's not something that had to be dealt with in MAPS 3. And so it seems clear that our implementation plan will need to address that and speak to that and bring some organization to that. And then there's also this question of the complexity of the operator agreements. And so as I said, the MAPS 3 program went through operator agreements. Not to say that each one of these has not been a lift on the MAPS 3 program, but I think it's safe to say that the operator agreements that are associated with the facilities in MAPS 4 are likely going to be much more complex than what we experienced in MAPS 3. I think some of these, obviously there's a fifth wellness center that's in here. I think the city's been through that song and dance. ADG's been with them. I think that is a relatively easy task. But I can tell you from what we know about Innovation District, Palomar, the youth centers, the Civil Rights Center, these are operating agreements that the city has not been through before. And so I think it's going to take some time for us to work through that. There's a lot of language in the resolution related to measurable benchmarks, and I think all of that has to be documented in the operating agreements. And so that will clearly be something I think that will differentiate MAPS 4 from MAPS 3. There's also this topic of external funding, and we've talked about it a little bit already this morning with the Innovation District. But if you look at, and these are just some of the projects, I may not have shown all of them, there are several projects in the MAPS 4 program that are going to rely on external funding. And so there's, as an example, the Fairgrounds Coliseum that's talked about in the resolution. There's a discussion of a $25 million in additional funding. And so we've got to think through all of that as a part of putting this plan together. Obviously, we can get a plan out, $63 million that's allocated for this project in MAPS 3, but if the other 25 is not sitting there and ready to go, it makes it problematic for that project potentially. So we have to think through all of these bits and pieces as we schedule and plan every project. And so I think really, just in closing on this section right here, I think because of all these things, we think the MAPS 4 implementation plan is potentially going to need a little bit more flexibility in it than the MAPS 3 plan did. Obviously, it's been a great roadmap for the process. I can tell you, 2010, 2011, trying to anticipate what we were going to need to do in 2021 is a big charge. And so we have that same challenge in front of us. And so I think one of the things we've learned is that flexibility is really important. And so that's, I think, should guide the plan to some degree. Okay, last slide, and then everybody gets a sandwich. So next steps, February and March, we are going to continue to work on the development of the plan, the program structure, putting a schedule together with the MAPS office. Our idea right now is to come back to this board in March and talk to you a little bit. I don't know if you remember from January, I spent some time talking to the board about the work that we did late in 2020, meetings we've had with project advocates, information that we've uncovered about the projects. And so we think maybe potentially next month we would come back and walk the board through that information and give you some more insight into the projects. And then really April through June is really development of the implementation plan, and I've got here communication. And I'm saying to be determined. I think we're really still trying to figure out the best approach for that. What I don't want to do is come in here and talk for 3 hours about 16 projects. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that in a thoughtful way that gives you everyone time to soak it up a little bit and digest it a little bit. And so David and Todd and the rest of the MAPS office and ADG, we're working through that right now, but certainly there'll be some communication, I think, in the summer months as it relates to the implementation plan. So with that, thank you for giving me some time. I'd love to answer any questions that I can. Thank you for having me this morning.
Jason, thank you so much, and I hope that everybody is excited. A number of you have wanted some meat and wanted to really get moving with MAPS 4, so I hope that this was a good introduction. Any questions of Jason? Any? Okay.
Everybody's ready for lunch.
Great, yeah. Well, no, it means you answered all the questions. Thank you so much. We appreciate all your work, and we will see you soon. All righty. I don't believe that we have any discussion items, so we'll move to comments by board, staff, and citizens. Do we have any citizens signed up to speak? No? Okay. Any comments by, oh.
Did you fill out a slip?
Okay. Okay, give us 1 second.
While we're waiting on that, I would comment that David Todd was kind enough to take me on a tour of the convention center. And Jason mentioned FF&E, which is furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. Can you tell everybody the complexity and the magnitude of that project for the convention center?
Yes, I can. So when you go to the convention center, every fork, every knife, every salad dressing ladle, every plate was specified by the architect and was bought by the contractor through MAPS. So every single thing, every mop bucket, every trash can, every floor cleaner, all of those things. We even bought an escalator cleaner. It's a special machine that connects to the escalator and cleans those treads. So that's part of the project also, is to make sure that it's fully functional whenever it's ready to be occupied.
Lot of detail, so thank you. We have a citizen who signed up, Peyton Binge, is that right? If you'd please come up and would you give us your address? And I believe you wanted to speak on the January 7th meeting.
Yes. Can you guys all hear me through this? Okay. My address is 5829 Northwest 82nd Street.
Okay.
I wanted to first say that I'm actually really excited about the presentations that were given today, especially getting to see it in detail further. It just really helps you envision what's going to happen here in the city. But before we talk about the future, I wanted to talk about the past. When Oklahoma City first hosted the Hornets after Hurricane Katrina, the city lit up. Finally, we had a chance to show the professional sporting world just how ready OKC was to host an NBA team, and we showed them. As someone who got to sing the national anthem before a game, watch the late Kobe Bryant play at the Oklahoma City Hornets, and see KD hoist up the MVP trophy before the NBA Finals, the Thunder in this stadium and where they play are very special to me. However, I would erase every single one of those memories today if it meant removing the memory of the tone-deaf presentation the Thunder organization gave to this board last month. It's no secret, I'm not a big fan of MAPS 4. And neither was the city, considering it had the lowest voter turnout out of all 4 MAPS votes. Go look it up. Maybe the election shouldn't have been rushed and instead put on a presidential ballot so we could really gauge the city's opinion of MAPS 4. But enough grandstanding, 13.5% of the city has spoken. The main reason I don't like MAPS 4 is because of how little it does in combating the homeless crisis in our community, whilst giving stadium handouts to folks like Bob Funk Jr., Tim McLaughlin, and the Thunder organization. In a city that needs 5,000 affordable housing units today, in a city where 125,000 residents are living at or below the poverty line, in a city that saw an 8% rise in people experiencing homelessness before the pandemic, MAPS 4 will give 4 times the funds set aside for homelessness towards stadium improvement projects. Just let that sink in. MAPS 4 times for stadiums instead of homelessness. So with that being said, I'm here to ask for quite the opposite of what Thunder was asking last month. Their stadium renovations should go last. He gave really good examples about existing facilities, and he mentioned parks and trails, but we know what the real existing facilities they are concerned about, and that is the stadium. Finally, the OKC Thunder, instead of coming here and asking, can we go first, you should really be asking, hey, OKC, will you take the $115 million we don't actually need for our stadium because we are a $1 billion franchise with wealthy owners and instead direct that money into affordable housing? That's the question that should be asked. And I think their organization would be surprised by how many new fans they'd get, including the ones sleeping outside their stadium. That's it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any staff or board comments? Any staff comments?
Only thing I'd like to mention is that we might be going back to virtual meetings next month. We'll just have to see how that legislation works out.
Yep. Any other, oh,
If I could briefly, Laura McDevitt in the City Attorney's Office, and it has come to my attention that tomorrow David Todd has a milestone birthday. I won't say the number, but I wanted to take this opportunity to wish him happy birthday.
Yay, happy birthday.
Thank you. I'll
Have to sing.
turning 30 tomorrow, so
I was going to say, you're finally 30, right?
thank you.
Congratulations. Are you going to do anything special?
No.
Oh, gosh. Well, thank you for letting us know. That's very special. Okay, any board comments? No? All righty, well, thank you all so much for being here. We will wait and see what March brings, but until then, please be safe and stay well. Meeting adjourned.